Right,
Do
we're
Keysight
live.
have a no drinking policy or what?
Well, I think we're live based on the fact that it says live. But anyway, welcome to Star West 2023 with the phenomenal, amazing, incredible Paul Gerard. And it looks like you're loitering outside of some brick wall.
Well, I'm afraid it's just a cloth backdrop, so it's my cool, or maybe not so cool looking random dry stone wall. Whatever.
So
How you doing?
we got some exciting topics to talk about. So we're here live. Actually, I've got, which I'll reach over and pick up now. We've got Jason's Checky.ai. So you've heard the stories, I think, a little bit about Jason Arbon's been working on a replacement for some of the tester bots, and this is his byproduct, his love child, and so we're hosting it today at the Star West Keysight booth, and I'm either going to stick one of these Checky stickers on me as well, just to be. But it's all about the idea is, which is what we've talked about numerous times around large language models, and of course, tester GPT, right? So, I want to kick you off with that first question. I know we've got loads of questions to ask, but you've done a whole stack of blogs around Chat GPT and how it can help testers. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you've found is potentially valid use cases and maybe some pitfalls?
Well, I did the first thing I did almost was to basically sit down and look at a web page and pass the HTML to ChatGPT and say, pick the bones out of this, meaning identify. And actually what I did was ask for fields, elements on the screen in each form. I briefed it to say you're an expert in HTML, CSS, JavaScript, testing, and basically led it through a conversation which lasted a couple of hours, I think, all in, although some of that was my thinking time to say what happens or what should I do next. And the long and the short of it was it was very interesting in that it could identify fields on screen. It could, when I asked it, suggest what the nature of those fields were. So whether it was a numeric field or a just text or a drop down or whatever, and it could identify the values on a drop down and so on and so forth. So it knew everything there was to know about the HTML, but it could also infer what validation rules would apply to each of the fields. And it doesn't matter what the application was; it was just a random website I happened to be playing with at the time. A live website for a financial services business, and it could suggest the rules that might apply to the various fields, and it could give reasons as well. It knew about boundary values, and I said, "Could you identify the boundary values?" Yes, and so it did. It didn't have a lot to go on, but the 1, 0, -1 kind of opportunities arose. But I asked it questions about this field has a rule, which is it's a national insurance number. In the UK, my national insurance number is NA XXXXXX. There's a pattern to it. So it seemed to know what that pattern could be, and you could ask it to create some test cases for a pattern that it might recognize and understand in its own right. At any rate, found the fields. We kind of agreed on some validation rules. I asked it to create some test values. Then I said, right, can you create some test cases in a tabular format with an expected result? It said straight away, yeah, I can do the first half, but I can't come up with expected results. I have no idea, literally no idea, what this thing is meant to do. I said, okay, well, just guess. And so whenever you have an expected result to provide in a table, and it provided a very nice table, it said, I'm guessing this, or it said, I can't even guess. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I took it on a little bit more of a journey, and we ended up looking at creating a Selenium script to run tests of that web page. And it came up with some code, and I have to say I didn't test it. I didn't sort of copy it and paste it into an editor and run it and so on and so forth. But it seemed to look okay. Now, I'm not going to argue that it was correct or not correct, but lots of people have generated code through giving ChatGPT instructions on some requirement or other, simple usually, I have to say. And the code by and large would work, but there'd be anomalies in it, or there'd be exceptions it didn't recognize, and so on and so forth. So you didn't get a finished product, that's for sure. Certainly you didn't get a finished product that didn't need testing, that's for sure as well. So over the course of, that was some months ago, I have to say now, and I think where we're at, or where I'm at now, is I'm kind of convinced that the large language model approach to anything depends on, if the knowledge you require can be found on the internet, you're in business. If it's, here's a system you've never seen, and I'm not going to give you the requirements, but go and test it, it's not clueless, but you can't rely on it. What you could do is engage it in an exploratory testing session and share what you have. And so a cool extension to what we've got at the moment would be for it to see what you're doing, and as you're doing it, to ask it, have you got anything to suggest, or what's your interpretation of this? That would be interesting. I think it could possibly add value there. But to say that a large language model based AI product could do testing, replace testers right now, the answer is not really. No, it's like a genius intern that's paid absolutely zero, that's got the answer to everything you can find on the internet, but when it comes to testing, it's very naive, very, very naive, I should say. So, and as you know, we've had conversations like this before. I think if we can, it's now possible to use tools which will allow you to take, say, ChatGPT or another large language model, to feed it information and that it can learn from. Now, mostly this is, you've got to do it in code, but it doesn't look like complicated. I've done a little bit of experimentation on that. But I think the future is somehow capturing what a tester would see on screen, would see in the code, would see in messages, would see in the changes to the database, would see in potential combinations and permutations, so it could make suggestions. We have to train it on the system under test. And if there's a requirements document available that's trusted, to train it on the requirements, and then use that information for a large language model to add value to us. But eventually, I think if we are really going to use AI, let's say, to replace testers, I don't think that's a very easy thing to do, even in the long term. But if we were, we have to give it a test model that understands all the underlying code, interfaces, messaging, database, production data logs, production database content, or test data content. I don't mean for it to be only this, but and it's got to figure out the patterns and the chain of events that cause, say, a change in the database. That some data goes into this screen, some. You're showing me now.
So you can't really see it, but the reason why everyone's phone's going off is there's a national alert testing. And it's exactly what, this is the whole point about being live, right? So they're testing the entire network. Is it going with you?
Mine isn't.
And, this is testing in the live. But in all fairness, I think this is a good point. You're about to come on to two things which I think are really interesting, right? Which is around understanding requirements engineering, interpreting requirements, leveraging this capability to potentially apply domain understanding of industry vertical, and then, understand whether or not it is actually be able to create the content that you're expecting, right? So if we say, if you remember the pocket bug that you did about the testing axioms, right? Part of it is there was dimensions. If we throw non-functional requirements in there to start, right? There's a certain amount of axioms. If those axioms aren't shown, then maybe it's not defined you the perfect non-functional requirement. So part of it is, I think, prompt engineering, and I'm gonna throw the term in low prompt, in the sense that there's an applied understanding of patterns for testing to say, okay, well, I expect speed to be a dimension, resilience, whatever the dimension is, and therefore I'm going to measure to see if those items appear within my responses. If not, I'm going to refine that conversation, which is kind of what you were mentioning before. But I actually wanted to kind of push you a little bit slightly to the side as well. Is like, obviously, I launched Jonathan.ai this week with this, and I started feeding into it, or what they would refer to for large language models on 3.5 Turbo as tuning. I fed it the ISO documentation, right? So I wanted to start training it with it's just over 1 million, just to let you know, 1 million words when you feed in all the ISO 29119 standards from 1 to 12. It's about 1 million words. So not a large language set, probably all language set, but part of it is, I know you're running a bit of a couple of side projects at the moment. One of them being a testing glossary, where you've taken the ISO, you've taken the ISTQB, you've brought in quite a lot of testing documentation with the idea of making it, to your new model of testing things, sources of knowledge, right? So you've got the sources of knowledge, which are in way of informing the system to say, these are some terms that I want to use. Like, I know you had quite an interesting conversation with it around it trying to understand pairwise testing, right? So part of it is, unless you define what pairwise is, it could misinterpret it. So the glossary of terms project, was the first step towards how do we, but it also could be domain specific, right? So do you think, this is the kind of way we need to be going at when we start thinking about becoming an engineer, recognized as an engineering discipline?
Mm-hmm. Is that a question or you didn't end with a question mark? I'm just wondering, what shall I say? For years, for 25 years-ish, honestly, it's that long, it's occurred to me and an awful lot of people that the terminology we use is not consistent across the board. I got involved, it's a bit of ancient history, but it has relevance, I think, to today, is in the early 90s, I think in 1993, I got involved in a standards effort to create a component test standard. Now, when I joined the group of about a dozen people, 10, 12 people or so, quite a lot of work had been done, but the document that was in its, the existing document of what they'd discussed and tried to put together no one was happy with it. So kind of it was a restart and start afresh kind of thing. So 6 months later, or maybe 9 months later, we were having quite in-depth and quite heated conversation about stuff that would go in the standard. And it occurred to me, I thought, well, I think, and I wasn't the only person. We all knew we were talking at cross purposes far too often. So I think I said, well, I'm a bit fed up with this, and everybody was kind of, we've got a problem here. We're not communicating very well. So I said, look, I'm going to take the content of the new version that we had, which was about 70 pages of text, quite a lot more than the ultimate output of the standard, and said, let me take it away and just do some analysis on the content of that. And what I literally did was identify every word, every 2-word, every 3-word, every 4-word phrases. Okay. Now that was a list of about 10,000 phrases. And it sounds like, oh, a Herculean task to go through that and pick out terms that are of interest that might need definition. And actually, it took a couple of hours. It was not a complicated thing to do. So anyway, so I came up with a list of about 300 terms and brought that back and said, here are 300 terms I think we should have good definitions for before we get into a barroom brawl about the meaning of life, and from that, it ultimately became pretty standard 7925-1, a glossary of testing terminology, because we couldn't make progress on the standard we were trying to create without having that in place. And so it was actually, a fortuitous argument to have got into. It was quite fun to do, and it wasn't very complicated. I probably spent a couple of days on this. It wasn't a lot. Anyway, now roll forward 25 years, still doing the same bloody thing, except there are definitions in various sources. So ISTQB have their glossary, randomly. The Dutch, the TMAP guys have their glossary. There's a ISO 29119,
Part 9, yeah. Well, 21119, yes.
Okay, yeah, which I kind of pilfered and what I literally did, I scanned it and basically scraped the terms out of it and the definitions as well. And of course, there's lots of duplicate definitions. So we have a term like integration and integration testing and stuff like that has multiple definitions out there. I also took a copy of, I can't remember the name of the document offhand. I've got it. Which is an IEEE document, which is a compilation of several glossaries across the IT standard spectrum. And there are, wait for it, about 5,000 of those. So I've got all those, and I've got definitions. I also thought it would be helpful to get some definitions from both the Oxford English Dictionary, which is kind of the European kind of side of things, and I think Merriam-Webster, which is possibly the most relevant general dictionary that techies might use. So I've got that as well. And of course, there's not many testing terms and technology terms in the Oxford English or the Merriam-Webster, but they're there for reference anyway. Now, literally, if we have that, my conclusion was people are going to run along merrily with their own personal definitions. But if they want to know what's going on in ISTQB or IEEE or ISO, they've got a definition they could compare and contrast and so on and so forth. But the other neat thing is, just by having that list of terms, you can analyze any text you want to throw at it. So, yes, the standards, maybe that's not of interest. I get that. I'm not particularly a standards person myself, but so be it. But you can also look at any kind of marketing information. And we've talked about this already, needless to say. Like, what is the language used and what are the testing concepts, let's call it that for sake of argument, that are being supported by the technologies that are out there. So Keysight's an example, and I've looked at Keysight and other websites and scanned content describing their technologies, and you don't get a very big list. So of the 5,000 terms, probably there's 10, 15, 20 or 30. It varies, obviously. So they're not using very many of these terms. Now, that doesn't tell you anything except the marketing is very, it attempts to be very concise because people don't read long documents. So they're not long documents. It's simple as that. But I think there's an opportunity to understand much better what some vendors are talking about compared with other vendors. Also, any document or any blog that comes out of, that is produced by an individual or an organization, to actually scan those and look at the terminology the terminology they're using, and whether what they're saying actually means what perhaps they are intending to say. But overall, I think what we need is not a single glossary. I think that's a bit of an ambition that might never be achieved. But what I think might be helpful, and this is what I'm doing with the YouTube channel, is coming up with explanations of terms rather than definitions. So the definition of, I mean, literally today I was looking at component testing, coincidentally. And what's a component? Well, there's unit, component, module, class, object. I mean, how many different flavors of unit testing are there? So that's a problem. But what's important is to have an explanation of it, of units, components, modules, whatever they're going to be called, and what unit, module, and component testing is. And that explanation has value. So what I'm doing with the YouTube channel is I'm trying to do one a week, and I basically went offline for about 3 months, didn't do one. But I've done about 20. I've got possibly another 5,000 terms to explain. No, that's not true. I don't think there are more than about 300 that are really meaningful to us in the testing community. So I'll stop there. So that's probably 5, 6, 7 years work. But why me? Why am I doing it? I mean, there's plenty of other people who could do this. And I think it would be helpful just to have explanations of these terms and then just put that on the shelf, ready to go, like a tool that you want to pick up and make use of. So I think there's value in that as well.
And I know this leads us nicely on to the test engineering society, right? Part of it is, 5,000 terms. If we just take a snapshot, I'll take a snapshot back to the 90s when I kind of started my automation career, right? The first thing I did was join a professional institution, the IEEE at the time, the IEEE in the equivalent in the US, and like my father before, who was an IEEE engineer, I wanted to do my own professional development, right? I wanted to get to a charter status and, be recognized within my field of engineers. This is one of the things we've never really had for testers and the testing, discipline. But at the same time, that professional development is made up on peer content with other experts or other people with these skills, maybe in a particular area or specialism. We're told continuously that we've got to be a kind of a jack of all trade, master of none. But when you're looking at, pushing, giving back and writing books and articles and blogs, how can you find an institution that will support you through that journey, that professional development journey, but also allow people to use that as a source of knowledge, right? A peer-reviewed by industry peers around, specialist topics, right? So I did a session this morning on the metaverse. That's an emerging area, right? So, when I was my last call, I'm talking about motion to render to photon latencies. It's a very specialist area, but we've got to measure it as testers, right? So part of it is, I think, this could be healthcare, this could be, financial services, derivatives, FX. How do you explain how you test a Monte Carlo algorithm? Part of it is, I think, we need to come together as and form this kind of engineering. And I know you've been looking at the engineering council and how they're able to help with the bodies to actually coordinate, allowing people to be recognized, but also join somewhere that allows them to build on their professional development.
Yeah, a lot to unpick from that, but one thing to say is, again, for my sins, I was involved with the early certification scheme with ICEB in 1997, which is 26 years ago. And the goal then, 26 years ago, was to start the process off of trying to build a definition of the testing profession. It wasn't about making money through certification. That was not the goal. It was all about trying to improve the performance of professional testers and to get recognition for being a professional tester. That was the goal. That kind of got forgotten in the story that's carried on over the last 20 whatever years. Okay, so now why do we have a problem? Why don't we have a definition of testing that everyone could agree on? exactly for the reason you just mentioned, which is there are people who work in banking who operate differently from people who work in aerospace, who work differently from people who work in healthcare and medical devices, who work differently from people who work on mobile apps in entrepreneurial lean businesses, all that kind of stuff, and so on and so forth. And what I felt was the right thing to do a few years ago, more than 10 years ago now, was to cut out all the domain-specific stuff, cut out all the technology and tools that we use with testing, with test management or execution or data or anything like that, to cut out all the methodology influences and various other things, which I won't go into. But I basically call these things logistics. And what you're left with is like just the way testers think. And the way testers think, I believe, can be modeled. And you know well, what I call a new model, which isn't so new now, but what the hell. It's 10 thinking activities. That's all it is. Everything can be mapped to those 10 thinking activities. And underneath those, there must be, and I believe there are, some principles that basically define what we do as testers at some level. Now, if the society is to register people as professionals, part of its mandate is to validate that people's knowledge is as per the standard, which we haven't got. So it seems to me that the Engineering Council, who published this UK spec definition, it calls it a standard for professional capability. I can't remember the definition of that, but it is a kind of standard, but it's very high level. It's a set of criteria that most people who call themselves a professional would need to meet to call themselves a professional, right? And it's in 5 sections. Sections 3, 4, and 5, or C, D, and E, are to do with leadership and management, or thought leadership, or actual leadership in a managerial position. Oh gosh, what I've got. The last one, I'll come back to number 4. It's slipped my mind. But the last one is about professional ethics and a code of behavior and a commitment to continually learn. I'm just trying to find it. Okay, the 4th one is communication and interpersonal skills, which more and more people are beginning to recognize that actually, you know what, technical skills are important, but your non-technical skills perhaps are even more important in the role of a tester. Maybe developers can sit at their desks, head down, listening to crazy music, coding away, and not speaking to anybody. Maybe they can do that. I don't think that's a good idea, but that's fine. Testers cannot operate that way. They have to be good communicators, to ask good questions and learn and so on and so forth. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is of the 5 areas of the UK spec definition of what is a professional, 3.5 of them are to do with completely generic personal, interpersonal, business, ethical skills. Fantastic. What about the technical skills? Well, technical skills fit in the first section of 5. And the definition of the criteria for that is it's described in less than 100 words. So you could say the whole of the technicality of testing can be fitted within this 100 words. Now, in that case, well, how the hell can you review someone's capability if the criteria is so kind of loose? Well, it's a peer review process. We will have people with a lot of experience in a range of industries, perhaps a very big range of industries, who recognize what skills are required to make progress in those industries as a tester, or as a test manager, or what we would ultimately call a chartered engineer. So, because it's peer review, it's less about what is on your CV. It's more about what evidence you can provide to say you've done certain things and acquired skills in that journey, and how well you can tell your story. So the questions from the interviewer might be, okay, before we get started, you've described this project. Okay, who are your stakeholders? What were they about? How did you communicate with them? What did they need from testing? How did you explain yourself? How did you arrive at a definition of enough testing? These are not questions that can be answered by saying, I've done an ISTQB course. These are questions that have to be answered through someone's personal experience of that journey. And so I'm hopeful that we will create a description of the evidence and knowledge required to achieve recognition registration. I'm hopeful we can consolidate that into a relatively small amount of text, let's say, a small number of key achievements and a small number, or maybe a slightly bigger number of questions to be asked. That will be public, but people who have an ambition to become professionally registered test engineers, they can see and say, well, can I answer these questions? If they can't, they need to find a project and operate in a way that they get the experience and they get the evidence so they can then explain themselves. Now that sounds rather elitist. Well, I'm sorry, you can't become a professional engineer in the civil engineering or mechanical or electrical or non-destructive testing or explosive engineering or welding engineering in less than about 7 years. So if you want a definition of your career path and where you want to go, professional recognition would give you some really clear milestones and some really clear objectives about what you should be doing and learning about in your continuous development. So in that way, yeah, it's tough. It will be bloody tough. I think there are about 60 skills. Now, don't quote me on that, but it's a large number of skills, and a lot of them are to do with, there's about 10 to do with communication. Okay, and there's quite a few to do with leadership and obviously the ethical aspects of it. There's a lot of things. Some of these could be clustered into higher level skills, let's say. But personally, I think I've got about 30 out of 60. And I've been at this game for 40 years. That's how hard it is, but I never had the direction that this regime might have given me. So, two things to say. One is it's hard work. The other one is you don't need all 60 skills explicitly in detail. You just need to demonstrate certain capabilities that will require these skills. And if you can evidence them and tell a good story, I'd say that gets you very much on the journey towards recognition and professionalism and hopefully better jobs. I mean, if you've gone through this process like a boot camp house meeting, you're fit. You're match fit to do the job. So I'm hopeful that it's appropriate for anybody in any context. It's a broad church. It's open to anybody, whether you're working in high integrity, call yourself a software engineer, whether you work for a bank and you're doing lots of, with all due respect to banks, they might be doing waterfall. Waterfall is still widespread, very widespread. If you're working in agile teams or continuous delivery, I think the same questions, the same stories have to be told, but your experience will be different. So I'm hopeful that we can come up with a regime that will be appropriate for anybody who tests anything. That's quite an ambitious thing to say, but that's where we're headed. I don't see why we can't do that. I'll shut up.
Yeah. No, I love it. And what I liked about it the most when we were going through the career manager, right, is that, like you said, if you're missing skills, and soft skills is hard, right? It's hard to justify soft skills, like wine tasting, right? You can say, well, I've drank a lot of red wine. That does not make me a specialist in wine tasting compared to maybe Vimo, who will tell you, what to match it with, the different types of grades, how to, look against a clear table to, get the right amount of age and clarity. Part of it is soft skills are really hard to justify, but within that UK spec, for instance, the career manager you'd be able to enter in your skills, and then it'd tell you what's missing, but then an explanation of what you need to get to demonstrate that skill. And I think that's the point. If you're doing your yearly planning, with your manager, and you're saying, well, what skills do I need to learn, right? You might be saying, well, actually, I want to do more in leadership, or I want to do, I want to work more on maybe my presentation skills, or, my soft, some kind of, soft skills, or learn a new language. Part of it is, I think, having some kind of guidance is really useful, but also to understand where you are. And like you said, it doesn't matter if they're a junior person and they're wanting to start with, the engineering, the lowest engineering mark. You can work your way up to that chartered status, right? And I think that's what's really important. I think part of it is we've recognized people maybe in the past based on exams they've taken, the years of experience. And I saw, obviously I don't want to do too much of the, but I saw the TLF, announcement, and I spoke to Jack the other day, and Jack did this really interesting post. What said, you can't just put words on it like playwright on your CV and expect that the SEO is going to pick up your, the one word that says skills learned playwright. That doesn't mean anything. Part of his explanation was like, well, what does that mean? Did you do it in TypeScript? What kind of project do you do? What was the end goal success? Which, part of it is CV's no longer just a whole stack of, oh, well, I'm a DBA because I've written DBA on my CV. Part of it is you need to demonstrate those skills. And I think this is a new generation where CVs and profiles are, need to be, a little bit more. I think we've been slightly disappointed by, taking things on face value sometimes. And, and I think being able to look at it and say, okay, yes, ChatGPT can pass the ISTQB foundation paper. Does that make it a tester? No. But my skills that I have as a tester are unique to me, and I need to be able to demonstrate and articulate them so that people can understand my strengths, my weaknesses, my opportunities for improvement, but at the same time, what I'm going to need as a career development and career opportunity within that kind of organization to grow. And I think, I found this at my start of my early career when, I was just started straight away doing automation. It's like, I probably didn't go through the same career path that other people might have done. And therefore, maybe I missed out on something. So, I think, we're always continuously learning. We don't want to get stuck in a rut. We want to kind of be able to keep building on our skills. Equally, I think it's a challenging environment out there, right? We're at Star West today. It's one of the largest software testing conferences, and there's still a lot of friction, right? There's still a lot as an industry around the value of tools. It was a great conversation you had about TKB, the tools knowledge base, which is over 10 years old, and the thousands of tools that are out there. There's people, there's techniques and processes, and I think part of it is we know it's complicated, and I'll bring Jason's thing mainly because I've not launched it yet and I want to see what actually happens. But partly what he did with testers.ai, which is what we've got here, is he created a form factor that allows you to go off and look at lots of websites very quickly, right? So if you wanted you're not a security tester or a usability tester, how do you know what the score, what good looks like? You could go and learn the W3C standards. You could go and look at some of the Lighthouse stuff, but you'll find that proper usability, engineers know things like, well, okay, what percentage do you need for people who've got, need high contrast mode? So, what Jason's done here, and I'd recommend checking it out as well on testers.ai, is the other thing. What he did is he auto-generated a whole stack of test scripts should always have internet connectivity when you're trying to do live demos. A whole stack of test cases for Star West and the Portland event next week with what to test on the website based on some patterns that he'd done when he was heading up the team testing Chrome at Google, right? You know, part of it is there's some blueprints and there's certain things that we can do. Does that make me a usability expert? No. You know, it gives me the point that I'm here and I need to go somewhere else. So I might need some specialist skills, right? But at the same time, you know, the joke around obviously Checky is testing, automating something is not testing, it's checking. Part of these use cases are checks, right? I know after speaking with Jason this week, unfortunately, somebody else who could sound like a singer blocked him on LinkedIn because they had a heated disagreement about we're testing and checking and automation. And I think we all need to get on, but at the same time, we also need to move the industry forwards, right? So part of it is there's different camps of thought, there's different groups, context driven camps. Part of it is we need to be able to share that. And there's other groups that are doing things like the ISO 29119, doing testing standards. And I think part of it is they've all got valid viewpoints. What they should be doing is bringing that together in something like the Test Engineering Society to really say, okay, how do we move forwards with this, right? How do we agree the multiple definitions of the same thing? How do we agree what that means, and how do we work as a community going forwards? Now, obviously, I won't expect you to put a reply in there and self-incriminate yourself in any way, but I think that's the challenge we're at. Is that I think partly is you're subjected to what you're subjected to, and if you are only provided by your employer with a course to do, and that's everything you need, then maybe that's not enough. And I think that's where there's a lot of people like yourself in the industry that want to help, people, on their careers. And I think that's really important. And I think it's something that's going to last a lot longer before the squabbles of today are finished, right? And I think that's a positive thing. We're obviously very passionate about it. Now we just need a platform to move things forward.
Well, that's to me, that's well, going way back, again, 25 years. Some of the schisms that sprung up because of the whole schools debate, which I have to say was not the whole definition. The whole idea of schools wasn't a bad idea. It was an interesting thing to bring to the party. But then people started taking sides and getting tribal, and we still have that. It's still there in the various groups that are out there. And I don't have a criticism about the concept of schools. I get that, but schools need to talk to each other. They need to understand the whys and the wherefores and the hows, of each side, because there are reasons why people behave certain ways. There are reasons why people use staged processes, heavy-duty documentation, lots of sign-offs, heavy-duty change control, etc., etc. And there are reasons why people have to be nimble. I didn't say agile, but you know what I mean. They have to operate quickly, without requirements, without documentation, without a lot of guidance, whatever. They have to be sort of more independent and free-thinking almost. There are reasons why that's the best approach. But you're still doing the same job, and to me, there are touch points of commonality which do not change. And some people even disagree with that, but I'm convinced it's a tribalistic response. Standards are bad, are they? Well, there's a standard in UK spec, for the whole definition of software testing knowledge. It's about 100 words. Now, I think that's pretty damn good. My engineering degree, a 3-year degree, the syllabus was 3 pages long. 3 years. Whereas, we know with ICB, it's a 75-page document, the foundation scheme, which is a 3-day class. Now, there's a reason why they've done that, and I'm not going to defend it or attack it, whatever. It's just the way those guys operate. So we have to recognize there are different ways of people behaving, and they behave in certain ways with good reason because the context they operate in differs. One of the problems with, I'm not going to criticize a context-driven school too much, but an example of where it's gone a bit wrong is the folk who promoted context-driven only ever talked about one context. They didn't talk about all the other possibilities. And so, they said everything has to be a certain way and anything that's not that way is wrong. Well, I'm sorry, that's just silly. It's just silly. Because the world is very complex, as we all know, and it's very varied and diverse. There are projects of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people. There's the biggest project I worked on was a 10,000 man-year project with 3,500 people working for 3 years on stuff. Let's call it. I'll go into that. And though that is a different universe, but there are still touch points between the guy who works for a small team and the guy who's running a team of 500 testers saying, can I have more resource to do the job I need to do? I need 500 people for a year and a half, and you're not giving me what I need to do the job. Or I need 2 people for 4 weeks and I've got 1 guy for 3 weeks. It's the same conversation, it's just the scale. And the difference between the two is logistics. It's individuals versus teams. It's heavy process versus very light process or no process. It's big documentation versus very little documentation, hearsay and conversations. It's the same problem to be solved. It's just a matter of scale and logistics. So I'm convinced that we can bring these things together. So I'm hopeful that the society will be a unifying thing rather than a divisive thing, because it doesn't exist in actuality yet, although we've got a lot of infrastructure in place now, as you know. But it's open to anyone. And if you say I'm a this school or a that school, whatever, well, I think the onus is on us to provide support in that area. And if you get into the registration game, the person or the people who are talking to you about your career background, whatever, should have a similar background. Otherwise, how can we operate? So to me, we should get rid of the tribalism. Schools, yes. Tribalism, no.
My first year, so I'm just trying to get it out.
I think there's a couple of things there which is really interesting. It's kind of I had a dream. I'd say I had a dream in the the big state, but I was building on what you talked about quite a lot about what would we want from a tool, right? What kind of information would we want fed into our integrated test environment, right? And I was sat on the call this morning with a professor from MIT talking about the metaverse and talking about, we're going to obviously with things like the Apple glasses in a few years' time, it'll be overlaying. So I'll be doing my electronics testing and all the spectral analysis and all the other information will just be augmented into my field of view, right? Part of it is we'll be taking feeds of lots of information and overlaying them into my space, my limited amount of field of view, which I have when I'm working on a prototype or a digital twin or something. And I was thinking, we did this really crude example what I was talking to you about last week about, have a conversation on Teams with my avatar and with Teams Mesh and just, ask a business analyst a few questions, right? And the business analyst reads, the transcript comes out the other side, and you feed that in and say, can you generate me some requirements out of these prompts that I've asked them, in essence, human prompt engineering. And then obviously, what it could be saying to me is, oh, you missed this question or missed this clarification, or you used the ambiguous word should or could, needs a bit more clarification. And I was thinking to myself this morning, I was thinking if Paul's glasses could have a conversation with somebody and it's taking what they're saying and kind of tell you the likelihood of what they're saying is correct or what's not correct. Equally, what is missing from the conversation to prompt you to say, well, actually, you maybe need to give a bit more clarification on what this back-end system actually does, or what that means within the context of this industry, right? You might be talking to someone, a nuclear physicist, for testing, a power station. You might not have the knowledge there, so it's overlaying the information to give you, superpowers in essence of domain understanding in real time. And then they may say words that you're not completely familiar with, or try and explain something that's complex to you, and it might be trying to explain that to you in the side to kind of give you that prompt. You don't know where this kind of technology is going to go. It might be a augmented testing, might augment your intelligence to help you drive these things. But what we see is, yes, they're tools, they have value. There's lots of tools we know from the tool knowledge base. Each ones have this capabilities that you might better use. There's a barrier of entry of knowledge of what those tools do. But actually, when you bring them all together and then you define clear examples of the use case, then these things are going to be very intrinsic. In the future, you're going to be testing a system, and exactly like you said, you'll ask it for some, test data in a format that you need, or you might ask it, well, what's the next thing I should be looking at? And it will start having cognitive reckoning, and it'll start giving you a bit of understanding. I was in Italy a few weeks ago with Diego from Forrester, and we talked about, AI augmented testing was the conversation, and both Gartner, Forrester, and IDC are both running MarketScapes this year. And we're bringing 3 capabilities to market. The first one is prompt engineering, low prompt, no prompt. How do you get to this point where you can feed requirements in and it can create test cases, it can create models, it can create executable specification, it can, tell you where there's duplicates, it can give you some reckoning of priority or whatever it may be, or risk. So prompt engineering is there. We know it's the largest paid salary in the US at the moment, 400,000 entry salary. So I feel like I need to go and apply.
I'm in the wrong job.
We all need to go and take that job. And then secondly, the other capability was around virtual test assistants. And I think this is very much like what you've been talking about for many years now, which is unfortunately very similar to Clippy, but we call it Eggy, or even you could call it Checky, which is, it sits in the corner and it helps you by saying, oh, wait a second, you've noticed you've never run an Amex through this point of sale system. And obviously there's a 4-digit verification code. Maybe it uses different WorldPay server. Maybe it's, has a different logic behind it. You might want to test that, right? Part of it is that virtual test assistant, like a virtual personal assistant with Alexa at home, is to give you prompts to help you maybe with things that you've missed, maybe that you need to have on the screen. Virtual test assistant, I think, is incredibly interesting. And then finally is this Copilot, right? And I know you've used it, everyone's used it, but we're building a Visual Studio code, but everyone's got their own favorite IDE. But the idea is, if you write just a code snippet to say, or a comment to say, oh, write me some code. And this is what you've been doing. I know you do a lot more code than I do, but you go off and you go and grab some code, and usually you read it quickly, you work out whether or not it's going to do the job you need, and then pull that in. So Copilot is going to, they're saying 3x productivity, that we're saying that there's 3 times more testing that needs to be done. So it's slightly more strain on us, I think, than them. But yeah, code generation, I think, is also one. So virtual test assistants, code generation, and prompt engineering, I think, are 3 areas of AI augmented testing that are going to be there and take advantage of some of this generative AI in the short term. And then, of course, taking large language models offline, like what we've been doing recently, and talking about, things like GPT for all, but, there's more variants out there at the moment, a lot more in Python. to then, run your own and train your own large language model. I think we're going to start seeing that a lot more as well. But with some kind of end summary kind of statements, because I know we're nearly up onto the hour, but, have you got any big kind of, big statements, any closing words that you'd want to do before I finish off that next bottle of wine?
I mean, probably to a couple of things. So one is I didn't have a go at the context-driven guys, just saying that there's a blind spot in their world. But by the same token, there's a blind spot in the waterfall come MySTQB as was. They didn't recognize agility and exploratory testing for a long time. And they are now, but it's taken forever, hasn't it? So there are blind spots in everyone's blinkered view of what this business is really all about. Now, to me, the trick for testing stuff like the metaverse is your test strategy will look something like, yeah, we'll do some manual testing. I'll be driving my car in the metaverse in the city of the future with a million other drivers and cars. Now, when I run my manual test, the beauty of doing it manually is the human observer is right there in place, doing the stuff regarding the test. But they are an observer. They can see stuff happening that no tool might see. But what about the other 999,999 cars? Who's keeping an eye on what they're doing? Well, that's what computers are going to do. So humans will continue to do exploratory testing, but computers will, because they can't look at all million other cars, they will look for patterns of the cars that are most interesting, that show the patterns of behavior and the patterns of their environments and the patterns of the traffic flows and God knows whatever else. That's where our AI and software is going to do the rest of the job. Completely impossible to do manually. So we still need large-scale intelligence to give the tools that are going to look at hundreds of thousands of opportunities to test the information they need to spot the right opportunities to test. And we still need humans to put the human factor in terms of it works perfectly in the test lab with automated tools, but it's completely unusable for a human being. We still need the human factor. So on the one hand, I think testers are going to have to get really smart to use how they think and how they use technology. And a lot of testers, I think, will fall by the wayside because a lot of what people are doing manually now will not be done manually. And that goes for exploration as well as, scripted, the usual old-fashioned stuff, let's call it. But the people who are left need to be much smarter, because they're going to be looking at a much broader scope of possibilities of testing. Because you have to. You've got no choice. It's all there right in front of you. And you can't just isolate one little piece of functionality and test it. That's what the developers will do. And they'll use tools to do that. The human factor of system testing is not going to go away. And so we need much smarter people who are much more self-aware, much more professionally capable, interpersonally capable, ethically capable, blah, 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 but also have insights as to how technology can support the way they think and what they want to do. So that's my big statement. There you go.
I love it. I love it. And on that bombshell, I just want to say a massive thanks to Paul dialing in very late on a UK time zone. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. We'll have to share some links with obviously the TES. I think we've got to early sign up. We're looking for contributors. So, and I know you're talking about this at an event next month. So, lots more to come in this space. So thanks again so much, Paul. We did it exactly within 1 hour. And I look forward to catching up with you when I'm back from the other side of the pond.
Yeah, well, good luck on your travels, and I'll see you on the other side.
See you later, Paul.
Okay, take care, mate.